So, as Barry said, tonight we're going to hear thoughts on and about the state of journalism in our country right now, about the many, many challenges facing the media today, about the ways our speakers are working to meet those challenges, and hopefully also a bit about what we can all do to support the work of a free press. To begin, panel. I think we all agree the journalism business faces a myriad of challenges these days. Political polarization, vilification and mistrust of media, fundamental disagreements on just what is fact, unrelenting financial pressures, the rise of AI, I could go on. But let's do this. For each of you, how about you tell us what you see as the biggest challenge to the industry or to your part of it right now, and who wants to start?
I'll kick it off. So thank you. I thought you were going to say we were accomplices, which we definitely were accomplices in the news. So, and I've been a journalist pretty much my entire life, covering social science and social issues related to science across news, daily news, across public radio documentaries and magazines like Scientific American. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Trust Project and why I started it before I go into the biggest challenges today, because you probably have heard about UC Berkeley and you know what it is, and you probably have heard about the Chronicle, but you may not have heard about the Trust Project. So the reason I started the Trust Project is because we were seeing started in the late 1990s, we were seeing this decline in trust in news, and it did not stop. And as you know, I've always been thinking about, well, how do we hold journalism to its highest values, and how do I work toward that? I felt that was part of my responsibility and all of our responsibility as journalists, and we just weren't doing it. Here was journalism in this digital era, and we were just doing the very worst things. First of all, you could not tell news and the multiple perspectives it brings you on any issue or topic from something that was designed to sell you a pair of shoes, or maybe now something designed to incite you to violence. And yet what we were doing is things like running celebrity photos or running series of mugshots with the idea of drawing clicks, drawing eyeballs. And so I thought, well, can't we flip the picture? Can't we make it possible to use this amazing technology to help people find truthful, trustworthy, accurate news? And I talked to a couple of people that I knew, who one worked at Twitter and one worked at Google, and I said, well, why can't we flip the picture here? And they said, oh yeah, that's all you have to do is train the algorithm. So instead of pushing everything down, we can uplift the news. And I thought, oh, well, that sounds pretty easy. You know, I didn't know. So I embarked, I didn't even know what algorithm was. So I embarked on this journey, and that started in 2013. And I also knew we had been talking among ourselves around how do we rebuild trust? How do we gain confidence in the news? And we were not getting anywhere. So we really needed to talk to the public. And so we went out and talked to people about what it is that they value in the news, how do they decide whether to trust it, and then brought people, senior news executives into the room, including Emilio here, who was part of the very early days of the Trust Project, and said, let's marry people's needs and wants with the fundamental journalistic values. And out of that came 8 trust indicators, which are now shown on hundreds of news sites globally, and they're also just a really great way to help anybody, anywhere, identify trustworthy news. It's kind of a news fluency tool, as I call it. So this was our effort early on to do a couple things. One is, or 3 things really, build news integrity and make it more obvious to people like how journalism is different and what are these values that underpin our work, even if we are imperfect at it. And then number 2, how do we help these tech platforms do a better job knowing what trustworthy news is and surfacing it? And then 3, how do we help the public know and be able to see that and discern that and use news in order to make decisions about your daily life, your community, and decisions like we were just talking about voting. And so we feel like we've been able to move the needle over time where are we right now, and what am I most concerned about, to get to your question. Also, and I'll try to be brief about this piece, because I know we'll come back to it. But first of all, we continue to do research. And one of the things that we hear over and over is this feeling of overwhelm and anxiety on the part of everyday people who are trying to be informed and who are trying to sort their way through this massive flood of information coming from so many different places. And when we talk to people, I was just up in Northern California working with library directors with the trust indicators, and I asked them to tell about, well, how do you experience the news, and how do you actually see it, and then also how do you feel about it? And they got up, and one after another they're saying, well, I feel angry, I feel upset, I feel overwhelmed, I feel scared. All these, and by the time we got through the whole room, we were all like, oh my God, this is horrible. So this is my fear. And it's not a fear, it's like something that we absolutely need to address. We need to help collectively. News is bad right now. I mean, there is a lot of bad news, and it's very hard to navigate through all of that and find the information you need. So what the problem that we need to solve is how to make that easier for people, both how can news organizations do a better job conveying what they have to offer, how can educational institutions do that, and then as the Trust Project, how can we help people find that information? And then the second piece, and in a way that feels safe. This is what keeps coming up. I want to feel emotionally safe and be informed. And then the second one is about polarization. And polarization, not so much because it's like this deeply embedded thing in society, but because it is being exploited. So we are seeing, like, there are thousands of news sites that look very much like local news, and yet they are designed to promote either conservative or very liberal ideas and values, and politicians from Democratic or Republican parties. And there are there's one in Oakland, there's one in San Francisco, there's one in Marin, there's one in Santa Cruz, Santa Clara, San Jose. So we are being, these feelings of polarization are being exploited to push further polarization. And as people, if we're not careful and think about where we're getting our news, how we're using it, what's underneath it, we can easily be pushed into further polarization. And so that's my second big concern I'll mention.
All right, who's next?
So, why do we live in community? Why do we have cities like Berkeley? Why do we have cities like San Francisco? Why do we have states? You know, one of the governing reasons why people began to come together for safety and to meet their basic needs and for community. And we live in an era when a lot of those needs aren't being met. People feel disaffected, they feel disconnected. Former Surgeon General Vivek Murthy has called loneliness the epidemic of our time, right? So much so that he has launched his own initiative to try to solve that problem. And if we're walking down the street or through a mall or something and we see young people in their phones and that sort of thing, we're like, oh, they're so connected to one another. They're chatting and texting and that sort of thing. But the one thing the research bears out is that they actually aren't. They actually feel very disconnected despite the omnipresence of these devices. And so I think that the feelings of disaffection, the feelings of disconnection, that's one of our biggest challenges. And I think that the media has a role to play to help solve that. But that's at the heart of partisanship, that's at the heart of tribalism. It's why we sometimes can't get things done. The pandemic only increased that. And one of the things that I think about every day with the young people who are coming through Berkeley is that they lived through the pandemic at a very formative time. And so the damage actually that was done to them is something that's going to resonate with society for a very long time. And I think all of our institutions, whether we're talking about higher education, whether we're talking about the media, whether we're talking about government, has to face that and begin to think about how we can get through to the other side.
Emilio.
I just want to talk about how disappointed I am that the slideshow showing all the gardening work did not include Michael Gray, who has told me repeatedly that he did all that work outside and that other people in the club are taking credit for it.
Actually,
so
Emilio,
you know who you are.
My rear end was in one of those pictures.
What,
so-
your rear end? I didn't recognize it. My bad. Yeah, I agree with all that. I would just say I'm a big fan of Timothy Snyder. He's a historian who wrote a little book that I think everybody should read. It's called On Tyranny. And it describes the behavior of whatever you want to call it, dictator slash fascist slash autocrat, whatever word you want to use. And you can see when you read that book how it matches up to what we're seeing now. The media is just one of many institutions under attack right now. You know, I grew up in Washington, D.C. We both worked at the Post for a long time. A lot of friends who work for the federal government, most of whom have either been fired or furloughed or attacked in one way or another. Every institution is under fire. And, you know, I admit we're not anywhere near perfect, but at a time when every institution is under such attack, you ask yourself why. And if you read the book, it's a playbook, right? What we're living through is a playbook. It's an attempt to take power from other institutions so you can control it yourself. And I do a lot of speaking in South and Central America. And years ago, right as Trump was emerging as a candidate, I was told by a Venezuelan journalist, all of them, by the way, have had to flee the country and have been in hiding for a long time, that we were next. And I told him, no, we're not next, because we have these powerful institutions that are gonna check things. We have these checks and balances. And one of them, I said, is the judiciary, because you'll never get the judges. And so when you look at where we are now, and you add to it what Sally and Michael were talking about, it has never been more profitable to divide the country. At the same time, the people who could have prevented it got it wrong. I was in meetings with Facebook in 2005 when a bunch of their people came to the Post and explained how things were going to work, and they talked about, anybody can post, anybody can publish onto a site without the fact being checked. And there were a lot of very smart foreign editor who said, wait, you understand a bad guy is going to use that to destroy his own country and take over his own country. You understand that, right? And they're like, no, the algorithm will catch it. And this is the first time I'd heard the word algorithm. And we have now seen from Facebook whistleblowers that the algorithm not only didn't catch it, but the algorithm empowered it, right? That the algorithm needs us divided so it can continue the rage scrolling that leads to, doom scrolling that leads to rage clicking that leads to dividing us. So there are just some very, very powerful forces aligned against us. But to end this segment on something of a positive note, if it weren't for the work being done by the New York Times, and yes, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, and Politico, and ProPublica, we would have no idea of everything the Trump administration is doing, right? In all kinds of foreign countries, they have no idea. In Turkey, one of my colleagues at the Post has a very good friend who was a graphic artist who got thrown in jail. Why did they throw a graphic artist in jail? Because everybody else was already in jail, and they were getting down to the graphics department. And so the work being done and the occasional rebuttal of Trump that we're seeing in the courts. I mean, he's had a really rough couple of weeks, and it looks like today that the $1.8 billion fund to pay off the January 6 people is going to have to be withdrawn because he finally reached a point that his own party couldn't stomach. So I do think that the press remains vital. In a lot of ways, it might be all that's left. And they are doing, under really difficult circumstances, a very good but imperfect, because we're all imperfect, job.
Okay, thank you, Emilio. Okay. So we talked about sort of the big issues that are facing the media and to some degree all of us. How about each of you talk a little bit about what you are doing, each of you, to try to meet and surmount those challenges you talked about, and maybe what you see others doing that you like to see and think might be making an impact. So go in any order you want. Doesn't have to be the same order.
I thought we would let the dean go first, but that's okay. So in the regional sort of news space is quite different. I was an idiot. I was attracted to the job in San Francisco after a very long time. I was co-number 2 in the Post newsroom, and I'd spent a lot of time reading angry. I was the digital editor, so I read a lot of angry comments from both sides on the political spectrum, and it's exhausting to read one side calling the other an idiot all day, and one side calling you an idiot all day. So I came to the Bay Area, and I remember telling somebody, well, you know what? At least there's only one political party. So how bad can it be? Wow, right? And so we did this really great data analysis last week where we tried to just break down the political tribalism in San Francisco and determine through data that there's 6 different groups, all calling themselves Democrats, who are fighting to the death, right? And so we, at a time when all rules are off in terms of politicians, right? All rules are off. The truth doesn't matter. You can say whatever you want. It's our job to try to bring some sort of clarity to the noise. And in some ways, if we can be a convener of thoughts and ideas so people can have somewhat rational conversations, then we do serve a big purpose. When I got to the Chronicle, one of the things we did is a project called SF Next. We brought in community members to talk about the future of a place that was a shit show in 2001, right? And there were a lot of divisions, and there was a lot of anger, and there were a lot of tribalism. But then when you separate out the trolls and you get smart people who care about a place together, you get a lot of great solutions. And you get people who really are willing to address problems. So I have faith that our role as a clarifier of confusion, of convener of the public, of blocking the noise as much as we can for people, and then holding the powerful to account regardless of what party they're from. You know, we are considered one of the more liberal newsrooms in the country, and we took out the Democratic candidate for governor. He's a Democrat. And we were the first to write about Dianne Feinstein's memory issues and seriously raised the question of whether she was still fit to serve. So we bow to nobody. We hold the powerful to account. And I think if we continue to do that, there's a very big place for us in a spot that's getting louder and louder and louder. And now the dean of the Berkeley Journalism School.
We actually like each other, if you can believe that. Of course, the first thing that we do when you think about Berkeley and you think about the Berkeley Journalism School, the first thing you think about is that we're educating students, right? I mean, that's kind of the no-brainer. But the thing I will tell you, because I get asked this question all the time, how can you be training students to go into journalism? Are they even interested in doing journalism? And I can tell you without fear of contradiction, and I have the numbers to back it up, students are running towards journalism They see the need. I'm sitting here actually slightly worried about our incoming class, because right now, if the number doesn't melt over summer, we're going to have one of our largest incoming graduate classes ever. And that is very heartening in this moment. Now, the thing we have to think about is, how are we preparing those students for real jobs when they go out into the world? A Berkeley journalism education, frankly, is one of the best journalism educations that you can get. We are going to help students produce real stories, both on the local and the national level, that have real impact. Our investigative reporting program, which many of you have probably heard of, does investigations that are peerless. One of the ways that they're making a huge impact right now is through our Police Records Access Project, which the Chronicle also was involved in, but where millions of pages of records on police misconduct have been assembled into a database in partnership with Stanford University and Berkeley Data Science, and now that information is being used by prosecutors, defense attorneys, news organizations to hold police agencies accountable. And that's something that David Barstow and the people at the IRP worked on for years that's having an impact. So that's one of the things that we're doing. We also have the California Local News Fellowship. I know we've had a fellow in the San Francisco Chronicle newsroom. I see Kat Rowlands in the audience. We've had one working with Local News Matters and the Bay City News Wire Service. The California Local News Fellowship is a program directly funded by the state legislature that allows us to put working early career journalists in newsrooms across the width and breadth of California. These are people who report to me. They don't report to the government. They actually don't report to the editors. They report to the dean of the Berkeley Journalism School, and they're doing stories across platforms. They're doing stories in every community, whether you're thinking about San Francisco or Shasta or the Inland Empire. Since 2022, we've had 111 California Local News Fellows. They've worked in 110 newsrooms. They've done 10,000 stories that otherwise would not have been reported, because sometimes they're working in news situations where there are only 2 or 3 people in the newsrooms, and that's having a tremendous impact. I'd also like to talk about some of the stories that our students are doing working with publications like Oakland Side and Berkeley Side. I mean, they're doing real journalism. One of our students who just graduated actually worked with Oakland Side and was responsible for doing a lot of the reporting on Oakland police overtime that I'm sure you all have been following. That is, stuff that's having a tremendous, tremendous impact. So we're trying to educate journalists, to go out to prepare for the next thing, but we're also doing the thing right now. I mean, we are producing real journalism. And actually, I just noticed I've got one of my lecturers in the audience, Christine Shivo, who works with the IRP, and she does a tremendous amount of work editing for things like Richmond Confidential and Oakland North, which are publications that we also put out. So, it's a mix of doing all of these things. And actually, as the dean of Berkeley Journalism School, I think that it's my responsibility, actually, to spread optimism about what journalism can do. The dark arts, the dark clouds of authoritarianism are gathering, right? And it's easy to feel like things are looming over us and that we're going to be crushed. But if these students are rushing into the profession, if they feel hopeful about the future, I think that we all need to feel hopeful. And so I like to take that hope out into the community to tell people, do not fear, right? I mean, one of the things I told our graduates 2 weeks ago was, people feel like the center is not holding. The center has never held by itself. People like Berkeley journalism graduates help hold the center. They're the ones who protect the truth, and sometimes, like in these times, they carry the truth through fire. And we need them, and they're not shrinking from the job. So,
Thank you. Yeah, just really inspiring what both of these gentlemen are doing. I think, so what we're working on is making sure that work like this here and around the world really can cut through the noise. And one area that we didn't talk about much is how AI is interfering with people's access to information, to news, the way the platforms used to be a little bit more, let's say, committed to making sure people had access to trustworthy information. That has really shifted. So what we're looking at is what can we do to enable the public to be part of this bright vision that Michael's talking about, because it isn't just news organizations that need to kind of deepen their work and push even harder, but it's how do they communicate with all of you, and how do you participate in building a solution together, building a better future together. And that's where access to news and empowerment through news becomes vital. We are working with these 8 trust indicators to empower people to be able to, again, find that news and navigate their way through it. And they are now they've been adopted over the past 10 years over news organizations in all these different spaces who may not even be affiliated with the Trust Project. So now you find information about the journalist, or information about funding, or separation of news from opinion that you didn't before. So we want to push those trust indicators more deeply into communities so that individuals don't have to struggle so hard to find the news and make these really vital decisions. When we just finished a project in Europe talking with people about how they feel about news, what they need from news, and they talked about, again, those emotions that I talked about, but also the very much wanting to be informed and wanting to have access to trustworthy news that they could then form a decision about and communicate with one another about, and we hope next to act on. So this is where our next step is. How can we push these trust indicators into spaces like you're standing in the Berkeley Central BART station? What if you were to see information about what trustworthy news looks like when you're looking at a wall and waiting for that train? What if you were to hear more about standards and policies that should be basic in any news organization? What if you were to be able to communicate that when you go to the library or learn about it in the library? What if you were building civic structures elsewhere and could incorporate it in the physical space, even like a park or a garden? So we're thinking about that, and we're also engaging with people to take that next step. So I said right now it's not just about building trust, it's also about action and about value, because so too often we hear people say, I really want to be informed, but is it worth my time to go through all this? And so we're thinking about, or we're actually talking with organizations like organizations that are building civic connections. There's an organization called Civic Lex in Kentucky that not only are they in schools, they're in communities, they are bringing people together to have community discussions about local events or local issues that really matter to everyone. So how can we inject the idea of we need to be informed into those kinds of conversations? We need to be informed and share the facts that will help lead us to a conclusion together. The other things we're doing is, like just now we have a pilot that we're working on with the preeminent scholar on pre-bunking. So you've probably heard about debunking, which is a lot like, is just fact-checking, like this is wrong, you read this, it is incorrect, it's fake. But pre-bunking will tell you, well, these are the manipulation techniques out there that you should be aware of. So we're working on that. We're working on all kinds of things. You're going to be hearing some PSAs if you listen to Spanish language radio or television in the Bay Area. Very soon you should be hearing about the trust indicators in those places. So it's all about not just like getting people, I guess, out of their chairs and off their couches and becoming participants in news and the outcomes of news.
Okay, thank you. So we heard some really inspiring things here, but we also heard from Emilio briefly that we're not perfect, right, in the news media. And I wanted to just talk a little bit. I will confess that the prompting for this session tonight came from some, what should I say? Some dissatisfaction with what was going on with coverage of the Trump administration, of what's going on in the world, and feeling like our media at the moment is not doing what it needs to do. I just want to ask you each if you could talk a little bit about, where are you seeing that, and what, not just examples of it, but either how does that happen, why does that happen? Let's talk about where are we stumbling when we maybe should not be.
I'd actually like to respond to that first, because I want to correct one thing, because I hear this and it makes me a little angry, actually. We sometimes fall into there's this misconception that we somehow lived in a golden age at one time when everybody was treated equally and they were able to get the information that they need and things were great. I grew up in Mobile, Alabama. I am the son of a man who had a 6th grade education. My parents grew up in the heart of Jim Crow South with Bull Connor, and even moreover, in the early 80s when I was a teenager, there was a black man, lynched in downtown Mobile, Alabama. So this is all very recent history. And when I think about the media, I think about the failings that the media has had for decades and decades and decades and centuries in serving many people in this country. So the notion that we sometimes have had, this golden age where the media was serving people is just inaccurate. What's happening now is that there is an awareness, frankly, among people who were often privileged, that what has happened to tons of other people can now happen to them. And that awareness, I guess, is very unsettling, but we have to think about the context, right? I mean, my dad could not ride in the front of a bus. He had to go through the back door. He drank out of separate water fountains. And so, when I think about what we're facing today and the fact that the media is imperfect and the media doesn't get things right, I'm like, well, it's better than it used to be in many respects, because the media was actually complicit in getting people lynched and in denying people's rights not that very long ago in this country. But, okay, to the modern point of your question. I do get disappointed. I have lots of friends. As Emilio said, we both were editors at the Post for a long time. And I have lots of friends who are in the Washington Press Corps. And one of the things that disappoints me sometimes about the Washington Press Corps in particular is the disunity that sometimes emerges. It's a very competitive place. And I think that there just needs to be more opportunities and more people taking advantage of opportunities to stand together. I know it's hard if the president calls someone Miss Piggy or something to dig in on that question and to challenge him on that question. But I would like to see more solidarity among the press corps. We saw it with the walkout at the Pentagon. And frankly, there is a part of me as a citizen who thinks that we probably should have done the same thing for the White House press room. And I'll always be disappointed about that. So.
Well, if I can, I want to respond a little to your initial point, Michael, because it's true, we have a long history in journalism of doing things right and doing things wrong. And yet, having just worked across standards and policies and transparency with news organizations now for 10 years, I'm seeing some very concerning trends. And talking about diversity in particular, like Eric Newton here, former editor of the Oakland Tribune, has worked very hard to build this idea that diverse voices are incredibly important, central to news that is accurate, that is full, that is serving your community. one of our trust indicators that came from the public, people told us, we want to hear from people like ourselves, and we also want to hear from people who are not like ourselves in news. And because we really see the value of news as a place to bring us together to hear about one another. We still hear that from people. And yet, when I told you it's one of our trust indicators, if you're a news organization that wants to be part of the Trust Project, you have to explain what is your policy about incorporating multiple perspectives in the news. And of course it is about race and gender, but it's also about ideology and other kinds of perspectives. And we are finding pushback on that now. I mean, we understand why it's happening. There's pushback happening, from the very top of our country. But why are news organizations bowing to that? We're seeing retrenching in other ways as well. One is we really push news organizations hard to be quite clear about the type of content you're seeing. When are you seeing original reported journalism with multiple perspectives? When are you seeing paid content? When are you seeing news that, of course, if it wouldn't be published unless in a reliable news or paper, unless it were coming from a position of accuracy, of truthfulness, and yet if it is paid for and approved by a company or even a nonprofit, is going to have a perspective. And we are finding news organizations trying to pull back from being fully transparent about that. What we say, you need to label paid content. And they're like, oh, well, we label it sponsored content. Everyone knows what that means. Well, I don't think so. Like when your kid's softball game is sponsored by the local mechanics shop, you know that they are not controlling the outcome of the game. When you read a news story that says sponsored, are you going to know that that this organization that paid for it actually is controlling what are the words in that story mean ultimately? So this concerns me, and I agree with you, Michael, completely about we need to back each other up. And in fact, I think we've seen that at the local level and at the regional level. But there is a certain amount of fear that's running through the news industry, and we can't blame journalists for that. And again, I guess this is where I say the public support can really make a difference.
Yeah, I was in the Post newsroom the night of the Access Hollywood tape when we had Trump talking about grabbing women by he said it's a pussy. And we all left work that night thinking it was over. He was done. That we had done our job to bring to light everything we could about this candidate, that this isn't the type of person who most people would want as president, and he won in a landslide, right? And I think the continual publication of the truth and having it not matter has been devastating to the news industry. Michael and I both work with Serge Kovaleski, who's a reporter at the New York Times, and you know him not because of his name, but you know him because he has an issue with part of his body, and I guess he's paralyzed in an arm, and he's just a sweet, sweet man and a brilliant reporter, and he's the one who Donald Trump made fun of from the podium and did these little imitations of him and basically mocked someone who was disabled. And there have now been 10,000 incidents like that, and yet he won again. And so before we can talk about the media and its role and everything, we kind of need to talk about that. And how did we get to a place where someone is caught on video, an ICE officer, whoever that was, is caught on video shooting somebody in Minneapolis, and everybody sees the video, and the response from the government is he wasn't shot. That's Orwellian, right? That's right out of 1984. So there is a fundamental problem with truth now. The other side has very effectively found a way to destabilize truth and to rock it from its underpinnings and its foundation. And it's the gravest threat we face as a civilization. Marty Barron, my old boss, the Post editor, talks about you can't have a functioning civilization if we don't agree on facts. And right now, we don't agree on basic science facts, right? Forget about news and forget about all that. We don't agree on anything, and the country is completely split, and there's no sign of that ending. So sure, the media can do its job better, and the media can be do all these things, but at the end of the day, we've done a pretty good job of telling the country who he is, and all it's done is make him more powerful. And it's not a bug anymore, it's a feature. And so we, in a lot of ways, don't know what to do anymore. We are continuing as an industry to publish all of it. The Times, or even the Wall Street Journal editorial page called it the most, was it the Journal or the Times? Somebody called it the most corrupt political administration in the history of the country, right? The news of what's happening, the truth of what's happening is generally out there, but half of the country is deciding not to believe it or not to care or to see it as a positive. And until we deal with that elephant in the room, the rest of this?
I think that's an important point, and it's also important, something that we haven't said. What's happened in the media has also happened as there's been a decline in trust in institutions in general. Gallup has been documenting that for almost 60 years. So almost every institution that we once thought the world of has had a significant drop-off in trust. The media more so than anyone else. But, well, yeah. But that gets to what Emilio's talking about, that fundamental sort of lack of connectivity of the fiber that holds us together, where we could even agree on basic things. We seem to have lost our way, and I think that every civic institution, whether it's the Berkeley Hillside Club, philanthropic organizations, corporations that say they're invested in community good, need to be thinking about this and working on this problem, because Emilio's right, the media can't resolve that on its own.
Thank you. Okay, so now that you've gathered the storm clouds on the horizon for us, let's talk a little bit about what signs of hope or optimism that you see for the media, for the democracy, for whatever. What's making you? Where's the light in what's going on for you right now, if there is?
Well, I'll kick it off because, first of all, we overemphasize, and I think the media, news media, and I include myself in that, we tend to overemphasize division. We are not, 50% of people are not ignoring what our current, or disagreeing with what our current president is doing. We don't know what that percentage really is. When you look at polls, you'll see shifting senses around that. In our own research, we're seeing, we don't poll around politics, but we poll around how people are thinking about and engaging with the news. And what we see are 4 different user types. And I think this is really important because oftentimes the loudest voices are, of course, at the extreme, and so it makes us all think that we are divided, hopelessly divided into these 2 extreme camps. And I spoke with a polarization expert in Europe who was telling me that, in fact, in their research and the science around polarization, that there is the risk of us kind of entrenching in identity, but in fact, differences across values, across what kinds of solutions we should be forming to the problems in society, those differences have not changed. They're basically the same proportions, and it's not getting deeper. What is getting deeper, as I said, is this feeling of this is my identity, I'm not going to move. So there is potential to move and to avoid that entrenchment in identity. And then going back to the user types. So we have the users that are out there checking and cross-checking the news, deeply engaged with it. We have people who are, we call them engaged, who are regularly using the news, often feel overwhelmed by it, maybe feeling underserved at the same time. They're not finding what they need. We're also identifying what we call the opportunistic news user, who's just there when news lands on them. So when, in Europe, people would say, news will find me. I don't need to search it out. And then there's the disengaged. So if we want to bring people together, what we really need to be doing is avoiding looking at the extreme ends of the equation and looking at those middle categories. And it relates to polarization because, again, polarization, we're looking at these extremes. We're thinking more like the engaged news or the avid news user and the one that's completely disengaged. They're both tend to be or can be very much on the extremes of the political spectrum. But in the middle are people who are really seeking information and could use some help navigating it. And this is where there's potential for change, there's potential for hope, where I believe that not only news organizations can do a better job reaching those folks and not kind of fanning the flames of polarization, but everyone here in this room has a role as well. By helping, like if you tend to be one of those avid news users, can you help your neighbor, your friend, your family member move from an opportunistic user to someone who is actually looking more carefully at news and actively seeking it out so that they can be informed and can hear and learn about these kinds of stories that really are telling the truth about what's happening in our country and how we can make that change.
Who's next?
I actually see several bright spots. So the first one is obvious, right? I mean, I've already spoken about our students. One of the things about my job, actually, if you're talking to the dean and you're a student, it's usually not a good thing. And so I'll find myself in our courtyard or somewhere in the hallways talking to students, and somebody will come along, they'll be like, Dean, you were supposed to be at a meeting 15 minutes ago. But talking to the students, they inspire me. And I think that we can't lose sight of hope when we have that sort of energy happening. I think that the collaborations that are emerging in this moment are important. When I think about some of the news collaborations that are happening, the interest from philanthropy in media that's happening, which, it's kind of sad that we had to get to this point to have some of those things come together. But there are programs like Press Forward, which is a national initiative to bring more philanthropic dollars into local news. That's all a response to sort of the crisis in local news and what we're seeing happen in the country at large. So I think that that's a good thing. I also think it's good, and maybe I'm reaching a bit here, I think it's good that we've had our institutions tested in a way that they never have been before, right? Because now we know that there are lots of things that we might have thought were laws or that were embedded in code, and they just sort of existed because of goodwill, or, it was because, of course, the president wouldn't push things that far. And now we know that the wrong people will push things pretty far. And so when we begin thinking about repair, we can sort of get a good sense of the things that we need to repair. And I do think we'll come back from what's happening. Maria Ressa, who many of you probably have heard of, the founder of Rappler in the Philippines, used to work at CNN, of course. She won a Nobel. The Philippines was in a pretty dark place in terms of media repression and social repression. And she's actually seen things improve there. And she actually thinks we're in worse shape than they are now. So I take heart in that, actually. Somebody who's seen some pretty dark things happen and has also seen a rebound. And I think that it's all instructive for us. And I think that when we come out the other side, and we will come out the other side, we will emerge as a stronger society.
I have faith in just how fucked up journalists are as human beings. They're, every day you open the Times or the Post or the Journal homepage, and somebody is breaking something inside the Trump administration. Those people aren't afraid. They probably should be, but they're not. There's something about a journalist where speaking truth to power, the sort of fuck you to the man type of thing, is still alive and well. When you look at the other prizes, the other published material that won Pulitzers this year, a lot of it was investigations of things like, Trump's tax returns and what he did to the Doge, what he did with the federal government. And there's a lot of hard-working, low-paid, highly stressed journalists who are still doing a really good job under unbelievably difficult circumstances. I also know enough about journalism in the rest of the world that we don't have it that bad. If you're a journalist in Mexico, there's a 2 in 10 shot that you're going to end up dismembered in the trunk of a car. If you are a journalist in many countries to the south of us, you can't live in your country. There are journalists right around us covering Russia, covering Ukraine, who have websites devoted to news. They can't even go back to their countries. And they're still at it. They're still fighting every day for the truth. And so I think the sort of the resolve and the arrogance and the insanity of journalists who will continue to fight this fight, even some without any income, going to Substack and doing it, for pennies, that gives me hope. We might be all that's left one day. The center might not hold, but I know a whole bunch of people who are not going to back down and are continue doing what they're doing because that's who they are. I mean,
Yeah.
just look at what happened at CBS today, right? When the lead reporter at 60 Minutes just dismembered his new boss in a staff meeting in front of 40 people and basically said, fuck you, fire me. And that really epitomizes kind of what a journalist says. He gets fired, so what? He'll go get a job someplace else. The need and the desire to speak truth to power is super strong.
Well, I agree with that. I think that's so important. And then there's the other piece where the public is stepping up, and other institutions, we talked about that a minute ago, who are also stepping up. So part of it is that we are getting sick and tired of this polarization. This is what we're hearing from people, or at least this feeling of polarization. We're also getting sick and tired of being on our screens. So we're seeing this movement toward analog. A couple of examples of that, and I don't mean that we should all go back and use our typewriters, but we are seeing things like there's this group called Hush Hush Coffee in Bend, and the idea it's called Hush Hush because you don't know about till the day before, and you just learn about this bend. You learn about some place in the woods that you can hike to, and when you get there, there's a community of people there just gathered, and you get good coffee, and you can talk to each other. There's also a group we're working with in Austin. It's a magazine store owner, and he's starting a We Love the News Club. And part of it, what he sees as a magazine owner in Austin, or a magazine store owner, is that people are a little bit lost around information and where do I find it. And so part of it is just, he says it's like a running club. It's like a brain exercise club. We're going to go to the store once a week or every couple weeks. We're going to learn about the trust indicators. We're going to learn about how different kinds of information that we care about. We're going to talk about it. We're even going to learn about how do I form an opinion and back it up. And then the next step would be to then what are some civic engagement activities that I can get involved with. So the point is just that we collectively, we are tired of the situation we're in, and we're seeing people in different sectors start to step up and make a difference.
Okay, so I wanted to ask one last question, and then maybe we can take a couple of questions. We're getting on in the hour. But we got a question from one of the folks here about what can I do, what's the most impactful thing I can do myself or these people here to let me see, I don't have my glasses on, I'm sorry. To ensure independent, reliable, accurate news is readily available to one and all. And I'll start off by saying, besides subscribing to the Chronicle, besides donating to the journalism school, or besides donating to Sally's project. So what else can people do?
So I've got a list of a couple of things. I will take those checks, actually, if anybody wants to write that.
Take them out to you or to the school?
Well, actually, you make it out to the foundation. But actually, one of the things that I actually didn't say earlier that I should have said, you know, Berkeley is an elite place. I'll acknowledge that. And one of the things that's extremely important to us at Berkeley is that we're creating opportunity for everyone. And that's why at Berkeley Journalism, we provide substantial financial support to about 66% of our students. And I think that that's important, right? And it's important for people to know that, because if we're having people who are covering the Inland Empire, or who are covering immigration, or who are covering agricultural communities, and they're from those backgrounds, it shifts the perspective, right? And it's more meaningful coverage that we have. And so I think being aware of that and how that changes the journalism is very useful. So I will say you should donate to programs like that. I would also urge you, I talked about the California Local News Fellowship. Go to localcalifornia.substack.com, and I'll make sure Michael Gray sends that around. That'll give you a weekly newsletter that with stories from across California that the fellows are actually doing. The final thing, I actually have a very specific ask. I talked about the California Local News Fellowship that is an independent program run out of Berkeley Journalism. It is directly funded by the state legislature separately from UC funding. There is a pending matter before the legislature now that they will be considering. We've got lots of supporters. But if you care about independent media, I would urge you to reach out to Buffy Wicks, Jesse Arreguin, Monique Limon, Robert Rivas. Reach out to someone in the legislature and say, yes, we want you to support independent journalism, and we think that you should fund the program at Berkeley, because our program's been around now since 2022. It's a proven model. But that you think that they should support this type of journalism, and that could have a meaningful impact, especially now when they're getting down to brass tacks. So.
Okay. Well, and of course, the Trust Project, we're not going to turn down your donations either. We're a nonprofit. But really, what the most important thing I would say to do is to recognize, and I've been saying this all along, your own role in the news, because it's not a one-way street. It's an engagement. And so that means a couple of things. One is thinking about what is your own news diet? Like, what are you paying attention to? How diverse is it? Are you going down a rabbit hole because it is more comfortable and safe? I mean, admittedly, it is. But are you listening to other perspectives and learning about them? To support local news. So that means, I can say it, subscribe to the Chronicle, but also think about news organizations in other places that might be struggling. We have, I'm thinking about the Georgia Current, who is the editor there, she gets calls from people who are like, you guys are biased, everything you do is wrong. I heard from somebody in Virginia, same thing. So there are news organizations who are struggling to do the right thing and really get the news out in very difficult places. And this is where you can play a role, and you can either support them financially or even just subscribe or pay attention to what they're doing and encourage that work. And then thirdly, at the back of the room, I guess you were going to say this, but there are the trust indicators that you can use to help yourself navigate through the news, and also you can help others do that, because I imagine the reason you're here is because you are engaged, you care about civic issues. This club has a history in that space, so you can be the one to motivate the next person to really play their role in paying attention to the information that really can help us change society for the better and being part of that.
Yeah, and you'll find some of Sally's handouts on a couple of the tables back there when you leave. Emilio, you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, I agree with all that. The only thing I'll add is that when you sign up for a subscription for 25 cents for like a year, and then they raise the price on you after that year, don't unsubscribe and then resubscribe again for the 25 cents. Pay the damn extra. The only thing I'd add is you pay 35. You can afford it because you are the dean. Okay. There is a great urge right now to run away from it all. In fact, Michael and I have a good friend who ran all the way to Spain to get away from everything here. And I would urge you to fight that. I would urge you to remember that this is a key moment in history in this country. And every citizen needs to do something. It is really easy I have my own sister has gone on a no news diet, and she proudly tells me it all the time, and I'm like, you know what I do, right? And so I get it why it's hard to look every day, but even just clicking on a website and reading a story helps. It's 10 cents or 5 cents or 2 cents, but being engaged, remaining engaged, and keeping up and supporting the people who are doing the good work. A lot of journalism right now to address this change has shifted to what we call utility journalism, which is a really strong attempt by the industry to do things to make your lives better. And if you look at the story that won us the Pulitzer, it was simply an attempt to write a story about how insurance companies are screwing California homeowners and why people whose houses burned down didn't have enough money to rebuild those houses. And it wasn't because of mistake, it was on purpose. And it helped elevate profits. When you look at, we had another Pulitzer finalist that sought simply to explain why a 14-year-old girl was found dead in a driveway in South San Francisco a couple years ago. And it had to do with the fact that she had really severe psychiatric problems that in California were being addressed by a for-profit psychiatric hospital system put in by Governor Newsom. I don't need to tell you how that went. But I will tell you that either today or tomorrow, Newsom will announce that he is redoing staffing levels at psychiatric hospitals. So going forward, there's a minimum number that will be like 3 times what it was before to make sure no kids are found dead anymore. So an investment in what we do is an investment in your communities and an investment in yourselves. We do try to make your lives a little easier. California is such a difficult place to live in with all the different things you face in terms of rules and regulations and just props to understand. And so we are trying to help in that way.
Thank you. Okay. These folks would love to stay here all night, I know, but Michael has to go rescue his dogs that are, so we're going to take maybe 3 questions, and I'll ask you just politely, make your questions brief and to the point, and no speechifying, and we'll take a few.
Emilio, if I may, you said Trump won in a landslide, but he did not. He won with 30-some% of the vote, and if I'm correct, more people did not vote who were qualified than voted for Trump. And what?
I was talking about the race against Hillary, not this most recent one.
Oh, okay. But
Yeah.
but I think
Access Hollywood was, no, landslide's a bad word, but won comfortably in the Electoral College.
But I think what's important is that more people did not vote than voted for him. And why are so many Americans not voting? And I think this relates to what you've been talking about, people who are going on a news diet or who just can't cope with the battery that we're all getting from the whole range of media. And some students, I would love to see some students investigate the issue of people not voting.
Make that happen, Michael? You can get that.
Well, actually, I could say, and Christine, who's in the audience, can attest to this, our students were actually very involved in the elections in Richmond. We actually co-hosted 4 debates. Yeah, we definitely should get them more involved in that, and we can do that. So.
Okay. If this is too broad a question, just move on. But what I'm thinking about is that there's a climate for news. News doesn't just kind of go off into spaces and magically find its way to news consumers. The climate, I'm going to just characterize it this way, is a combination of increasing concentration of wealth and pretty much a vacuum in the early education system, so that the combination that we need is to not feel powerless and to find out about things that give us the individual power to create opportunity. So if those two things aren't available to us, that's a climate where news is not particularly going to make a lot of difference these days, except to people who are already really in pain or highly motivated, because there's too much noise out there. So my question to you is, based on what I just described, what do you think should happen, in the near term to reduce those two deficits and maybe kind of link them together in a different way?
So there was a fascinating piece of research done by a journalism school that's nowhere near as good as Berkeley in Illinois, rhymes with Southwestern. And what they did is they talked to young folks about news consumption all over the world. And what they found, which was fascinating, and also explains the rise of the influencer, which is a whole different conversation. But what they found with these young people is they had done a pretty good job of filtering the noise. They didn't see it as noise. What they had done is they had looked at the noise, dealt with the noise, and gotten rid of the crap. And so that led them to a handful of news sources that they completely trusted and that they went back and forth because they grew up in an environment of noise. And so they have adapted to it in ways that are problematic for the news industry if you're not the source they've taken, right? The source they've taken in a lot of ways is personality-driven influencers. So our industry is trying to figure that out a bit, the creator economy and doing that. But there's a lot to learn from that for other generations, which is it's not noisy if you cut everything else out. And the tools are there to cut everything else out. If you want a news feed on Twitter, of all things, that only gives you 5 or 6 news sources, you can do that. You have to work at it, and they'll fight you because they'll drop stuff in that you don't want. But I think it's up to everybody to make sure they are getting the news diet that they want, and you have to be an active participant. If you let the tsunami come to you, the tsunami will overtake you. If you fight the tsunami and if you're a young person, kick the tsunami's ass, no problem. They don't have an issue with there being too much noise. They got it figured out. And we can learn a lot from that.
Yeah, and I think one of the what we heard from younger people is that also that they're turning off their apps or really are looking for, they feel like they're overwhelmed by all this social media and recognize the problem there. So that's a good sign, as well as the designing their own news diet. The risk, as you're pointing out, and it's a risk for all of us, is that it becomes narrower and narrower, and in fact, replicating the algorithms that are doing that to us. So you're talking about education, you're talking about the underpinnings, and I think what's important there is thinking structurally. So it's not just about my own news and how I engage with it, but what are our roles here as voters, as people who are just paying attention and have influence in our own spheres. And one area that we haven't talked about much, but I would point you to, is AI and the dominance of technology platforms in the distribution of news. Because if we really need to be paying attention to the oversight of AI, the regulation of it in terms of how much are we going to allow it to manage the way that we encounter news, the way we encounter information. And I'm not saying that like it's some sort of external power, but chatbots, all the different, like your good news summaries, are creating a barrier between you and the source of the news and the people that are out there reporting the news. So Europe has been a little bit of a leader in this area, so we should be looking at Europe. There are various states, including California, that have tried to make some adjustments here and put some pressure on AI and on technology platforms to play a more responsible role. And so the other piece is to really look at that, pay attention to it, pay attention to what's happening in education, because it's not just about what we think about what's going on in Washington or the governor's office. It's about what's happening every day in all these institutions that should be serving us.
Yeah, can you comment on recent events in Hungary where we had an autocrat who kind of controlled the media and was overthrown nonetheless? Can we pull any lessons from that for us?
Yeah, that was really interesting, right? Largely because he didn't figure out how to fix the election. Because that's really weak when it comes to fascists. You really, like step one is fixing the election. I mean, there aren't any elections in Russia. There's voting, but there aren't really elections. That was really interesting, and I do think there is if you look at some of the struggles on the right now, where there isn't really a consensus on what to do, they're going into they have the strong leader they wanted, they have total control of the government, and they are suffering charitably from huge economic problems. The steps they've taken haven't worked. And some of that comes down to the fact that it's really easy to criticize when you're not in charge, but when you got to run the place, and you got to run a place like Hungary that has all kinds of pressures on it, it's very, very difficult. And Republicans are learning a little bit about that now, right? A lot of the moves they've made have kind of backfired. They had to give farmers a $21 billion bailout because of how bad the tariffs hurt their, bread and butter voting community. So I do think there's always been in DC this sort of thinking that let them drive the car for a while. They're going to crash it into a tree, largely because everybody eventually crashes it into a tree, right? And so you're seeing some of that now in Hungary. And, we'll know in November, November 3rd, November 4th, we'll have an idea of where the country is and whether the sort of standard indicators of election losses hold, right? There is nothing going into these primaries that says anything other than a catastrophic defeat for the right. If they were to survive that, despite the economic situation in the country and some of these other things, then it's a whole different conversation. But we'll see come November.
All right. I think that will close up things. Let's give our panel a great round of applause. Oh.
The dean will be signing autographs in the foyer after the event is over.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you.